So do you still consider yourself as a minimalist?
I do. Bar the fact that I now own a motorcycle, I have a very, very limited repertoire. Limited isn't the right word. I've got a very small and concise set of clothes, and I generally tech shirts that I got from tech events. I have one pair of jeans, and then I've got another pair of jeans which has a hole in a very inappropriate spot.
Mine has a hole in my knee, and also in my groin is starting to get a bit holy.
Yeah, so I'm actually wearing my jeans with the holes today because my bag was lost on the flight back from the United States.
Yeah.
And I'm only going to receive it hopefully tomorrow. But because I have such a small number of clothes, I don't have any clothes here anymore. Not until my bag arrives.
Yeah. So I think one thing that's quite interesting to delineate is the difference between essentialist and minimalist. So I read this book last year at the beginning of the lockdown called Essentialism, and you pointed out that your motorbike is not something that's minimal, but I would say in terms of an essentialist view, the bike is something that brings you joy, and it's therefore is something that's essential to making you happy.
That's fair. There is this narrative on both sides of the minimalist spectrum that some people think that you need to cut everything that isn't absolutely necessary for survival. So it's like you're going to be living in your apartment with your, one pair of shoes that works as everything. And then you've got the sort of newer form of minimalism that has kind of been popularized by Marie Kondo, where it's, does this item elicit joy? And I think that's a very good delineation over there, because I certainly own things that do bring me joy. But if I were to pack up my entire life and transport it, I could get it in the back of your car.
So for me, growing up with parents which are, I'd say, more in the,
maximalist.
Yeah, you know the kind of type like general South African middle-aged people have kind of almost like a keeping up with the Joneses kind of mentality.
It's a boomer problem.
It is a boomer problem, and I mean, for a while, like not wanting to buy anything was kind of because of being poor.
Right.
Well, not poor, but like, as a student, you kind of you think, can I put off buying this item and rather go out and drink and do that kind of thing?
I'm a minimalist by necessity.
By necessity. And then I watched this kind of show documentary about minimalism, and then that's when I was thinking, okay, am I just tight, or am I actually a minimalist?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I'd say that I'm definitely a minimalist because I realize that now that I'm in my late 20s, I can actually afford all these trappings of the middle class, and I explicitly don't want it because it kind of gives me a bit of anxiety thinking about managing all that stuff. Even, again, buying my motorcycle, I love my motorcycle. I love riding it. I like that it is mine and I can tinker with it and whatnot. But the admin that surrounds that is, it would have been so much less work for me to just lease a motorcycle in perpetuity, which actually brings up another point over here, is that the entire economy is moving towards a rental economy, not necessarily owning a place but renting, not necessarily owning a car but renting or leasing. Depending on where you are, you can also rent your home furniture. You can rent fashionable clothes without ever actually buying it yourself. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, I think this is brilliant, and in other cases, I think that it disproportionately affects people of a lower income who can't afford to be minimalist, at least in that sense.
Yeah.
So I didn't own a car. I haven't owned a car since I've been in Cape Town. And that's been great for me because I had access to Uber, and Uber over here is extraordinarily cheap.
It's gotten expensive.
It it's gotten expensive, but it's not expensive when compared to, you know, like the other side of the world.
Yeah.
I took an Uber from the airport to my house yesterday, and it was, you know, $9 for a half-hour drive. Whereas in Denver, I would get an Uber, and it would be extraordinarily expensive for a really short, like 2-mile drive.
Yeah.
That I took one Uber over there and never again. Whereas over here, I'd feel comfortable taking 2 Ubers a day if absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
So with this specific example, in Denver, you can't necessarily afford to be a minimalist when it comes to transport, and it would be in your best interest to actually buy a car, especially with their low interest rates on car loans.
Yeah.
Whereas over here, we've got higher interest rates, and Uber is cheap. So that makes sense to me.
It's definitely there's an element of privilege in the minimalist mindset, I guess. But you make a good point there. That is it also that you're minimizing the admin. Like for me, I do pay a little bit more for convenience in certain areas. I just dislike the whole admin that comes along with things and owning things. Like particularly, there's a lot of pressure for our ages to, you know, buy a house, settle down, or I mean, mostly buying a house, and this is kind of part of the whole rental picture too. I don't know if it's the same for you, but like a lot of people my age are all like, oh, we've got to own a house. It's like something that's maybe also ingrained as part of the whole South African mentality of, you know, you got to have a house or else you haven't made it kind of thing. But for me, I just see it as a lot of admin, and I'd rather put that money towards experiences than like tangible things.
You are a filthy millennial, you know that?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it comes a bit from like some my parents too. Sometimes they prefer to go on a holiday, or I prefer to go on a holiday than to buy some item that I'll probably never use. Well, I'd use it once.
Yeah.
And then I go to some people's houses, and their houses are just filled with like crap, like, endless amounts of crap, and I'm just like, why have you purchased this? Like, if you really, you know, maybe it does bring them joy to a certain extent, but it can also have this like accumulation effect, and then you just feel sort of like swamped.
Yeah. I definitely say that the more stuff that I have, the more I feel limited in the things that I can do. Let's take, for instance, you've been living in Airbnbs for the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Right? 8 months. Wow, you've been here for a bit. And I think James Altucher pretty much said something along the lines of, hey, if you can afford it, live in Airbnbs your entire life. There's the ethical quandaries with Airbnbs raising living prices in cities and stuff, but the root of what he's saying over there is fairly interesting and like very minimalist in essence. Is like, why would you buy instead of rent when renting is so easy? Because renting on Airbnb, you don't even have to sign a explicit lease agreement that you will rent this for the next year. Just, you know, if something better comes along or you feel like going and doing something else, why would you be tied into this lease? And that's a fairly interesting one for me, because it means that these 1-year leases mean that you have to move out on a day and then move into a new place on that exact same day, or try and like work in between that, which is generally a really tough thing to do. It's like, if I wanted to pick a property to, say, semi-permanently settle down into, I certainly want to pick from the spectrum of properties and not just properties that will be open on the day that I move out of my other place.
Yeah. And I think it's good, like living in Airbnbs for as long as I have, you do kind of start to miss having like a place that's kind of your own.
Yeah, I hear that.
Especially when it comes to things that you do enjoy. Like I kind of enjoy being able to cook.
Yeah.
Or I enjoy the process of cooking, but you know, not every Airbnb has the best kitchen setup. There's also, you know,
They don't have sharp knives.
They don't have sharp knives. They don't have, you know, all the stuff that you used to, so you can't really cook the same kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole element of, you know, maybe it's more in the routine of being able to cook in your own space, and also for things like work and just, you know, when I on my laptop and stuff, you know, having a monitor or having a mouse, as I was saying earlier, I haven't used a mouse the whole year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are some of the things that would maybe make me a little bit more effective.
Yeah.
And maybe I could, you know, compensate for that by having a fixed office. But then at that point, you're starting to accumulate to more than just one bag of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
You like start to, I mean, even now I've like purchased a headset because I need to do calls every day. And I've started purchasing a couple of items that just make my work a bit easier, but it's ended up me just lugging this stuff around and having these endless wires in my bag.
So, well, you make a very good point of there, and this is pretty much where like the central line that I fall into is that while it seems very convenient to, say, live out of an Airbnb permanently, I do very much like that sense of home. You know, this is the place that I've kind of crafted, and it's got my effects in it, and it's got a knife that's sharp, and I'm familiar with it, that I can like cook something very comfortably, and it is home to me. So taking that further, yes, I do sometimes idealize the idea of like buying a place and having that be my home base in perpetuity, and outfitting it in such a way that it like really represents myself. And I think to a certain extent that is, that's perfectly fine. I'd say that the housing market in Cape Town, at least, is still pretty difficult. In a lot of cases, it makes financially more sense to rent instead of buy, depending on where you are. But yeah, I do want a place that is inherently my own, and that could be because, you know, in the West we're taught that, hey, you need to own land at some point.
Yeah, exactly. So the one thing that I did when I was in university, and it was also partly not like you know, I was forced to. What was quite interesting is finding out your base level of what you need to survive.
Yeah.
And it is sort of a minimalist kind of thing, and it comes up in this FIRE, or like you know, saving lots of money, retire early. I can't remember the full acronym, but just finding like what is the minimum amount of money you need to survive, and then at least you have kind of your baseline.
Yeah.
And then anything above there, it also gives you a sense of, you're like, hey, well, at least I don't live at that baseline, and you know, I get a little bit of like enjoyment from not being at that level. But it also gives you a sense of like, hey, if I need to, I could probably live at that level, and that's the kind of minimum income that I need.
Yeah, so there's a blog that I thoroughly enjoy called Mr. Money Mustache, and he's this Coloradan who he retired at 30 with his wife, and they now have 2 kids, and they live like a very rich life, but a very simple life that is actually fairly inexpensive. They essentially live on like 240,000 rand per year as an entire family. But keep in mind that this is because they own the house that they're in, and they have like they've already purchased their bicycles, and they get around on a bicycle a lot, and definitely well worth the read. He talks about, you know, retirement planning and essentially just being like financially savvy, with the intention to retire early, and figuring out like what is your actual baseline and what is keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
Because realistically, if I were thinking in terms of my university self, right, I could definitely retire by 30. But I don't want to live like my university self. My university self was living in like a shitty rundown commune. Yes, I loved it, but I was also, you know, 18, 19,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there was black mold in the shower, and the sink in the kitchen was so low that it hurt my back to wash my hands in it, or to wash dishes in it.
Yeah.
So figuring out like what is your baseline, and then building from there is great. I've found that personally, I'm very happy with my quality of life right now, and I can very much afford it and put money into like a decent chunk of change into savings, and I think that is kind of like essentialism to a certain extent. Is I definitely have a good time. I've got things that bring me joy, but what actually brings me joy most of the time is the interpersonal connections with people, having dinner out with, friends, cooking dinner in with, people.
poikies.
Yeah, cooking poikies.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have to buy a poikie. You got it right out of your parents'
Yeah,
garage.
exactly. And like one of the sayings from the Essentialism book, I think it's by Greg McKeown or yeah, I think that's the person. Is things like, if it doesn't add, subtract. So if you find yourself like going out of your way to do something, you like, and it could be anything. Like, maybe you're going to visit some friend that not really, there's certain levels of friendship. You're like, okay, I'm going to this guy's party or whatever, but I don't really like the dude, and it's better to just like remove that from your life. So I like also with admin and things like that, you want to just, you're like, why am I doing this admin stuff? Like, I don't really enjoy this. I'm not like, it's not fun. So try and remove it. And when you like focus in on just those things that bring you joy, then it makes your life a little bit easier.
So I'll take this one step further. Is that I'm very much a digital minimalist as well. The idea to me that some people have like 5 different email addresses, that just gives me anxiety.
Yeah.
Right? Is I just want one email address that I do all of my work out of. I want. I don't want to have multiple bank accounts. I just want the one bank account that does everything.
Yeah.
I'll even find myself when I'm coding stuff that as soon as a feature has been removed, I explicitly go and remove all code related to that feature, just because I really want it to be clean, because I really want it to be like tidied up, and I think that that's fair. I just don't want that cognitive burden, and I think that's one of the reasons that I tend towards minimalism, is that I don't want to have to worry about all these other things.
Yeah, all of these different things that get in the way from your main goal. So you kind of have to come up with like a couple of main tasks. There's that one quote from some rich dude. And he said basically you create a list of the 100 things that you want to do in your life, and then you choose the top 3 or the top 3, and you say these are the ones that you got to focus on.
Give it 1 second for
and then the rest are.
Sorry, we've got a walking tour coming through the building.
We need to have like an on-air kind of neon sign.
Right.
This is where it would make sense to have our own office.
This is where it would make sense to have our own office. So here's a good example: is Jason and I, we both work out of a co-working space.
Yeah.
And a co-working space is lovely, but it does mean that when we find places to record, we every now and then have people, walking through.
Yeah.
Because we've just found a nice couch somewhere and have a laptop open in front of us and having a chat.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, this kind of quote was that you basically have a list of top 20 things you want to do when you before you die or whatever, and your top 3 are the things that you need to focus on, and then the rest are the things that are going to distract you. So you have to avoid the things in the bottom items so that you can focus on those top items.
That makes sense.
And that is part of it, is that you kind of and part of essentialism is like, what is the thing that's going to move the needle the most in terms of getting to where you want to go, and just focus all the energy on that. And I find also in my work life, you end up like spreading really thin between all of these different ideas and different initiatives and different things that are going on, and it's mostly like one person's got this idea and you're like helping everyone out. But at the end of the day, like nothing really comes of it, or it's all of this half-assing everything rather than full-assing one thing, you know?
Right. So that's actually a very good point, and it's something that I've had to remind myself of. Is throughout my entire adult life, I always find myself like starting new side projects and then getting involved with them, and then like spreading my attention between all these different side projects. And I used to have like a yearly ritual of going through everything that I'm working on and ruthlessly just getting rid of like 75% of them. But for the past, let's say, 2, maybe 3 years, I've managed to focus pretty well on the things that are the most important to me. And currently the 2 projects that I work on is Just Sketch Me and Bearblog, right? I have an entire Trello board of ideas that I really want to explore. So every time I get an idea, generally I would just hop on it and start cracking away at it. Now what I do is I put it on the Trello board and I leave it there. And then, sometimes I'll be thinking about this, or I'll revisit that Trello board, and I'll be like, actually, this was a dumb idea, and I'd remove it from the list. Right?
So, but how do you get to that point? That's what I want to maybe just double click on. You've got an idea. It's kind of like it's like almost like a eureka idea. You're like, this sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about putting that off? And is it like that structured that you? Because I also have the same thing. Like I've got a projects folder in almost like every laptop I've owned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually filled with at least 30 different projects in each of the folders. And you go in, it's like a requirements.txt in a virtual environment. It's like it's kind of started, and then I'm like, okay, and then it like fades away. And what I've also realized, what I've tried to do more recently, and it's a little bit harder, is to try and quantify, what is the impact, or what is the kind of result that you want to get,
mm-hmm.
and then that'll kind of motivate you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like you kind of just want to do stuff that's fun.
Yeah.
And then when you're like tired, you want to do something different, And maybe that's just the part of play.
Well, I think it certainly is, and like to a certain extent, I build these little projects to entertain myself, which is much harder to quantify, right?
Mm.
Is like I am actually getting enjoyment from it. So I don't really think of it as like, this is my work, and these are the things that I need to do for my work. But I have adopted that mindset up until such a point that I can realistically not work anymore.
Yeah. But that's what my thought pattern is, because I kind of want to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I've just thought about it. It's probably like a feature of curiosity that you create all of these different projects.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm curious about this. How easy would it be? You start it up, and maybe there's a certain element of thinking fast and slow. It's like if it comes faster, and you're able to make progress faster, you probably think that it's like a little bit easier, and you're like, okay, this is easy. But then you get to a point where it's like, okay, now I have to implement a login system, and you're like, okay, I'm not.
Well, so here's the one upside about just putting it on a Trello board, is that I haven't spent on all these different ideas that I've had recently, right? I haven't spent any time implementing anything for them. It's literally just a card on Trello. And generally what will happen is I will, set up a project, and I'll start tinkering away with it, and then I'll run into something that I didn't think about, right?
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, this actually won't work because of this thing that I didn't consider. Whereas now I've got the luxury of just like thinking about it in the shower, and I'll be like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't going to work because of this thing. And then I can just kind of like lose interest in it.
Yeah.
And then I can remove it from the board without spending much time on it, right? But then the ones that stick around on the list for a really long period of time are the ones that I have kind of like self-selected for and self-validated for.
Yeah.
And so those are the ones I'm gonna definitely work on when I decide to start opening up new projects again.
And then do you time box it? So you're like, okay, I'll evaluate because I tried to do this at one point. I was like, okay, I'm gonna just every new idea, I'm just gonna put it into a Trello board, and then every 3 months I'm gonna review what I'm working on, or like projects that I'm interested in trying to build, and things that I'm not, and then I'm going to try and switch to something different. If at that point I'll decide, am I enjoying this? Is it fun? And if not, then I'll switch to something different and then focus on that for 3 months, so that I have at least a single task that I'm working on. And this was probably after I read that book, because I was like, okay, I'm doing too much at once. I could rather just focus it all on one space.
Yeah. So I don't have any like formal method for doing that validation, but it does also go through social validation when I talk to people about it. So you've probably heard of, like half or 2/3 of the ideas that I have on my list, just because I'd be like, hey, this is an idea I'm working on, and we'll have a chat about it over a cup of coffee or something.
Yeah.
And through that, I'll also start to explore the things that I didn't necessarily consider in the project from your perspective.
Yeah.
And so, to a certain extent, that's a evaluation as well. So let's turn this all the way back around and talk about what are the things that you own, just in general.
I own like clothing.
You own clothing.
I maybe put it in terms of value, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like from the most valuable thing to the least, and I think probably I have a camera.
You do have a camera,
which I have bought recently, and have probably not used as much as it should have.
So does it bring you joy?
Not necessarily yet.
Okay.
Because my phone camera is pretty good,
right?
So I just use that, and when you're posting to the internet, it's pretty. You can barely tell if it's down like a DSLR or whatever.
Sounds like if I were Marie Kondo, I would tell you to sell that camera.
That is true, but then I also realized the other day that my phone camera is actually broken.
Oh, no.
So I took my phone out to take a picture, and I saw this blur, and I was like, that's interesting.
Oh wow, it's actually fully cracked.
So the glass is cracked. So, but photography is something that I feel like I kind of enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I like to enjoy taking pictures and stuff like that on my phone. So that is one thing, and my laptop, which is another, which I really enjoy.
Yeah.
At the time, it was quite expensive when I bought it. It was the first time I bought something that was like kind of brand new, top of the range.
Mm-hmm.
The Dell XPS. I use pretty much weekly. My cell phone's probably the next biggest ticket item in terms of like personal affinities. Mm-hmm. And that's about it. Like, there's not much,
Yeah,
and
that's fair.
then my clothes, and then obviously I've got a few gadgets and electronic things. Like,
yeah, that's fair.
Some headphones and stuff like that.
Like a good set of headphones goes a long way.
A good set of headphones does make a difference.
I'm very glad that I had my, big, like, seals around the ear headphones on the plane, because there were two mothers with infants right in front of me,
that is
screaming away.
Was it on the long leg?
Yeah, 14 hours.
Oh my gosh.
14 hours of screaming infants, man.
What, did you come straight into Cape Town?
Yeah.
Did you see people walking up and down the aisles?
Oh, like with the baby?
No, just walking in general and doing like exercise.
Oh, I mean, I was that dude.
Okay,
I wasn't doing exercises.
I've got a hunch that I don't know if it's everyone. I think it's just South Africans that do that.
Right.
They walk around, they go stand, and then they do exercises and squats. Because I've been on a couple of flights around the world, and it seems to be only when they're coming into South Africa that people do that.
Yes.
I don't know if it's a...
You're right. You're actually right. Is like, I'm that person. I don't necessarily walk up and down the aisles, but I'll go stand like in the section by the bathrooms that's a bit open, and I'll like touch my toes, and I'll open up my hips.
And I think it might also be related to South Africans not having a very high regard for authority. That's like, I think most Europeans are like, oh no, don't want to go stand in the front and disrupt other people. Whereas South Africans are like, yep, I'm gonna go do my squats and do my push-ups.
How are you all doing? Don't mind me, I'm just getting my hammies.
Yeah, just getting those hands. It's probably also the time when people used to smoke on planes too, because I remember like my parents would go to the back of the plane to go have a cigarette. But anyway, what would you say is your biggest ticket? Obviously, your bike.
Yeah, mine is similar to you, except I now own a motorcycle that I'm very fond of. I've got my laptop, which I spend most of my time on. So I ended up also shelling out and I got, top of the range M1 MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
Which kind of, we'll visit this in the future, but the things that you spend the most time on or time with, I definitely think you need to spend as much as you can on them, as opposed to as little as you can. And then I've had the same cell phone for the past 4 years. It's an iPhone 8, and it does everything that I need it to. And I don't actually want a new iPhone because it will do too much. I don't want facial unlocking. I don't need anything that my cell phone doesn't do. I'd actually be happy to like downgrade my cell phone even. And then I've got so few clothes that by my bag being, in transit. Right now I don't have any clothes. I'm wearing a pair of jeans with holes in them. But I have I've got a wooden chest in my room. This is an interesting question for me, is that if my house were burning down, right, and I could run and save one thing, I would save all of my writing, like all of my journals that I've kept over the years and my notebooks and stuff. Because everything else can be replaced, right? I can replace my bed. I can replace all of my clothes. I can replace my laptop and my cell phone. But I can't replace those books, right? So I've now got the wooden chest, and all my books go into that chest. And if my house is burning down, this is hypothetical. It's more like if I were to get rid of all of my stuff, the wooden chest I would like leave at my sister's place.
Yeah.
Right. And wherever I move, that will be the one thing that comes with me.
Yeah. I've got like this old like biscuit tin that I leave at my parents' place, and I just put like those kind of like things that I've collected along the years that have been pretty cool. Like I've got some old magic stuff from when I used to be like a magician.
Yeah.
I also started journaling like last year, so I put my first journal in there.
Yeah.
And I've kind of done the same thing, and I just keep it at my parents' place because it's like safe to keep it there. But it's that's kind of like your personal wares, and it's part of like your history and like the things you want to hold on to. So if you were to give one piece of advice to someone who wants to become more minimalist or essentialist, what would you give as a piece of advice?
I'd say find. Let me give this some thought. I'd say it's really just about being very mindful. Is whenever I'm terrible at shopping, right? And the reason that I'm terrible at shopping is because I always have a lot of intentionality and mindfulness around the purchases that I'm making. So let's take, for instance, both you and I had a very hard time finding shorts in Cape Town. Some people don't even think twice. They're like, oh, I'm going to go and get some shorts, and they'll like walk out with 4 pairs of shorts. Whereas I'm like, I want to get the perfect pair of shorts. I want the pair of shorts that is going to last me for the next 10 years.
But it's also because you're wearing it frequently, because it's like something that you have, and you wear those shorts and you're like, okay, well, these are my shorts. I don't have another pair.
Yeah, and I'm fiercely attached to them. I mean, let's take, for instance, the jacket that I'm wearing right now. I love this jacket. This jacket's been modified. It's got some colors on it that were added by a student of mine, and it's just got so much personality that I don't actually want to have multiple jackets, because then I have to like share being worn between these different jackets.
Yeah.
And I actually genuinely like that. So I'd say just when making purchases, be mindful of them.
I like that, because mindfulness is very important. Kind of, it's also like digging into your own psyche and your own thoughts. You're like you obviously have to be aware of impulse.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, and maybe it's also for me like I see consumerism as like a bad thing, and I think it's maybe the way I was brought up, or I've always like shunned consumerism. So buying for the sake of buying. So I'm always like very aware, almost to a fault, of advertising. subliminal messaging and those kind of things. So whenever I am thinking of making a purchase, I always think, why am I buying this? And you basically thinking like, am I buying this because I want it or because I need it?
Yeah.
And is it gonna, is it worth? And the other thing for me, and maybe I could add it as a tip, is the opportunity cost, like
of owning this,
of doing this,
yeah.
So the opportunity cost, and this is something that comes from economics. And I only did one semester of economics, one class, because we had to do some alternative thing. And the opportunity cost is basically, I can either purchase this, or I can purchase something else of the same value, or do something of the same value.
Yeah.
And like looking on the flights today, like for about 7,000 rand, you can get a flight to Europe, or you could get a flight to some destination. And then if you're buying a jacket or a new jacket, like 3,000 rand, probably more, a couple of a new television, you're basically saying, I would rather have this television than this travel experience.
Yeah, so that's actually the television, jacket, and travel experience is a really good example set, because you may not wear a jacket very often, right? But some people will use their television for more than the value of that. So like, let's take for instance Rico, right? He plays a lot of video games and he watches a lot of series, and for him a 7,000 rand television makes perfect sense, right? Because he will use the shit out of that TV.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, making a 7,000 rand television purchase would be absolutely ludicrous, because that's not a thing that I really spend my time doing. With jackets in general, with clothing in general, is like, you should spend a decent amount of money on the important bits. So like a good pair of shoes, a good jacket.
That is the alternative.
Yeah.
And minimal, like, the thing is, the point that's good to make is that minimalism is not cheap.
It's not. Well, so, it's cheap, but over a sustained period of time.
Yeah, so you got to take into account time. And this is something that I only clocked on like after my university days, is that cheap clothing doesn't last, and so you end up replacing it a lot earlier, and therefore you end up spending more money anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas, as you're saying, saving up to buy a decent jacket, or to buy a decent pair of shoes, to buy like a really comfortable bed or comfortable pillow, like doing it the proper way, like, and even if it's like a high, like a better brand or whatever, like Patagonia or something like that, you want to buy something that you can kind of enjoy and also wear. So that is important, because over time it does tend to last longer.
Yeah, you bring up Patagonia. I love Patagonia as a brand. Because their stuff is made to last.
Yeah.
It's explicitly built into it, because their business model does not require you to purchase new things time and time again. Yeah. They'll like repair it for you for life. And so when I was in Baltimore, I was out for dinner, and the zipper on my pants I was wearing broke. And I replaced it with a pair of Patagonia shorts. And those shorts are lovely. They're the best pair of shorts I've ever had worn before in my life. And they should theoretically last me for many years to come. I enjoyed them so much that I actually bought a pair of Patagonia long pants, like a technical jeans, and so now I have 2 pairs of long pants.
Yeah.
And hopefully those are going to last me for the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think, and I think to kind of close it off is also just to be more intentional with your day-to-day, kind of taking a moment at the end of the day, or even at the beginning, to just kind of think about, maybe if you have an idea to buy something, or you have an idea, I want to do this, put it onto that Trello board, and maybe evaluate it at a later date.
Yeah, have a Trello board, have a Trello board for purchases. For
purchases, and that's kind of what I do. I think, okay, do I want to get that? If I'll think about it, and then I'll not impulsively go do that.
Mm-hmm.
I will mull it about, and then over time I'll say, okay, probably don't need that because I don't want it anymore at this time. But if you find yourself constantly coming back to that, then maybe it's worth, throwing some money down and doing that, because you don't want to live with nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we're not trying to be austere.
Yes, it's not austere.
We are not Spartans.
It's just focusing on, and for me the big thing is just cutting out things that aren't enjoyable. Like, if I don't enjoy something, just don't be afraid, because it's, at the end of the day, it is your life. I guess you just gotta live it the best way you can.